Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Estyn podcast about inclusive practice and some of the work that providers are doing towards an anti-racist Wales. My name's Jassa Scott and I'm one of the strategic directors in Estyn, and I'm joined this afternoon with some really special guests who are going to share some of their insights on this matter. So I'll first of all introduce you to them. So first of all, we've got Tony Bate, who's one of our inspectors and was one of the authors of this year's annual report. So welcome, Tony. We've also got Martine from the Vale, and Martine's been doing some really interesting work in the Vale, working with schools on professional learning and how they do some action research into this matter. So thank you for joining us, Martine. And finally, we've got Sian, who's the assistant head from Kitchener Primary School. And when we inspected them, we found they'd done some really interesting work about their curriculum and building an inclusive school. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Sian.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So in Estyn, every year we publish our annual report, and this is one of the ways we bring together evidence from our work in inspection and thematic inspections, and we hope that by sharing that helps to improve practice across Wales. And one of my responsibilities in Estyn is around our own work towards anti-racist Wales, so I'm really excited that we're here this afternoon discussing this. And this podcast is one of the ways we're hoping we'll share some of the emerging practice in this area from our guests today, which will hopefully be helpful to others on their journey in this area. So just setting the scene, back in March 2021, Professor Charlotte Williams, who's actually currently one of our board members, highlighted the need for every teacher and school in Wales to be equipped to confidently develop an anti-racist curriculum. And since then, the Welsh Government has published its Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan and set out a range of actions it wants to take. So this has been a government priority. And one of the things we found when we're out talking to providers is it's an area that sometimes they lack that confidence at the moment to take forward. So I'm hoping that the conversation this afternoon will help share some of people's experiences so far and give some little ideas, maybe spark some thoughts and some creative thinking about how people can take the first steps. So maybe we'll start with Tony. And Tony, maybe you could just give us a flavour of what the annual report is actually saying about work in this particular area.
Yeah. Diolch, Jassa. So we have published a cross-cutting report to sit alongside our annual report. It's called Towards an Anti-Racist Wales. So please keep an eye out for that. It draws on inspection evidence and other work with schools. And one of the key things that it looks at is the learner's experience of racism. And it highlights a couple of main points, really. One from primary schools, where many pupils in primary schools feel safe and that school helps them to treat others fairly. And then in secondary schools, racist incidents were more prevalent, with racism being reported in about half of secondary schools through our inspection questionnaires. And also, where there were higher percentages of pupils from global majority backgrounds in schools, there were more pupils reporting unfair treatment. And in other sectors like further education colleges, for example, many learners and staff there have experienced overt racism. However, covert racism in these providers were highlighted as being more common, but of course harder to identify and harder to report, essentially. So from that part of the report, looking at the learner's experience of racism, we saw a sort of mixed reply, I guess, to some of the questionnaires that we issued to those providers.
And what kind of things were we finding that providers were doing to respond to, I guess, this challenge and some of what you've described there?
Yeah, there are some positive moves in this area, particularly around curriculum development. So many schools are beginning to teach about Black, Asian and minority ethnic histories and experiences within the curriculum. and including contributions from prominent figures from ethnic minority backgrounds. However, the range of individuals represented was often limited, so I don't think that's fully established in all schools across Wales currently. But around half of the providers that we visited, they do use events and projects and so on to promote diversity. Although these were often isolated activities and didn't always address diversity beyond a kind of a superficial level. So although we did see some really interesting events and projects being used by schools, overall, not many schools were doing it in enough depth from there. Something else that the schools are doing in terms of developing their curriculum is trying to involve pupils more in the way they promote an understanding of diversity, and also sustaining a focus on involving families and parents, bringing their experiences into the curriculum to try and engage more with the community, with the parents, to create a more in-depth and diverse curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, in terms of delivery of that curriculum, staff across the system are essential, aren't they? Does the makeup of our education workforce reflect that global majority in Wales?
Essentially, no. Overall, because we have a teaching profession which has around 1.4% from global majority backgrounds, whilst, of course, in Wales, that is 10% in terms of the population having are from global majority backgrounds. There is a higher proportion of support staff, around 7% from global majority backgrounds, and about 4% in terms of FE teachers. However, they are still underrepresented, essentially. The figure is even more stark around those in leadership roles. So around 0.4% of head teachers, for example, are from the global majority background. So that is quite a stark figure. And it doesn't look currently like that's going to improve at a really rapid pace. For example, recruitment of global majority teachers will remain a challenge in the future. This is because there are just low numbers going into the profession to start off with. Around 4 to 5% of trainee teachers are from global majority backgrounds.
That's really interesting, which I guess makes things like professional learning even more important for the workforce that is there. Did we find anything about kind of the impact of leadership and professional learning in this sort of
we
area?
did find that leaders are increasingly taking advantage of professional learning opportunities about diversity and anti-racism, working with external providers to improve staff understanding and the provision around this. So where we saw good practice, leaders were focused appropriately on developing their staff teams in this area. A few leaders are proactive as well in evaluating the curriculum, and then that informs their future professional development of their workforce so that they feel better equipped, I guess, to deliver a curriculum that focuses well on being as diverse as possible. And also in our report, we highlight some effective practice that we've seen. So hopefully from some of that, you can pick up some ideas that to apply in your school or in providers. We also include some questions for reflection for schools, so that they consider, things like, how well do we believe our curriculum is delivering our ambitions in this area? What level of training do we need to provide for staff going forward, and things like that. So I think that's really a good sort of place to have a quick look at some effective practice happening in and across Wales. But I'm sure we'll hear more about that from our panel members today.
Great, thanks, Tony. And so that annual report is available on our website now. So I'd urge people to go and have a look. And now we'll maybe look forward to hearing some of that practice from our other guests. So maybe, Martine, if I come to you first, one of the things Tony picked up on there was around professional learning. And I know that you've been embarking on a project in the Vale of Glamorgan aimed at professional learning and action research to actually raise staff awareness of anti-racist practice and as a result change that practice in their school. So can you tell us a little bit about that project and how it's going?
Well, we're in year 3 of doing action research in the Vale of Glamorgan, and it started off as a pilot with 6 schools, and then it's grown. We had a number of schools, and now we've got 2 cohorts. But the reason why, for me, this is the most impactful professional learning, we give teachers, especially leadership, members of the senior leadership, time and resources to embed anti-racism. It's not a tokenistic type of professional learning. It takes place over the year. It's hard. And but what I feel really proud of is at the end of the action research, finding out what it looks like on a day-to-day. So once they've done their action research and they present their learning day and it's all lovely, we as local authority go back and find out what it looks like, and that involves speaking to their steering groups. And what's great about the steering groups with the pupils, they're made up of pupils from the global majority and allies. So for me, the action research has worked really well because it involves pupils, their families, but that allyship, especially in areas where there are low numbers of people from the global majority. So from my perspective, the action research, giving teachers time and making sure the right people are at the table has been really impactful. And just making sure that when we're doing the professional learning anti-racism, teachers know what racism is. Because when you're talking about low numbers of reporting, you can't report what you can't see. So making sure that senior leaders have time to understand what individual racism looks like, institutional and structural looks like, because then they can really make deep change, whether it's their curriculum, whether it's their policies and their communities. So finding out what it is, and then there's why. There's the Welsh Government Directive, there is the Estyn Directive, but what I find really heartening working with schools is as the research starts to get some momentum, they think about they're doing it, it's the right thing to do for their school community. So that, for me, is professional learning when you know it's working, when teachers and school communities are taking ownership of this type of learning. It's not just a one-off celebration day, it's deep change. So having somebody to coach the schools over a long period of time, for me, has been the most impactful. And what it looks like is children being culturally literate, but also school leaders. And that confidence, rather than colour blindness, for me, the thing I'm most proud of with the action research year 3 in is that cultural competency across senior leaders in the Vale. And then you go to the steering groups who are more than articulate to tell you what the grown-ups should and shouldn't be doing to be more actively anti-racist.
That sounds really interesting. I know I've talked to a couple of the teachers and leaders across different schools in the Vale who've been involved. And they've talked quite emotionally about that journey that they've gone in, that understanding towards being more culturally literate, as you say. Can you maybe talk about some of the tangible changes you've seen within the day-to-day life in schools that have come about as a result of the journey as well? Has it kind of got to that stage where what kind of things are those steering groups and teachers as a result of that reflection doing differently?
Well, what I love about the steering groups is the power and the agency the steering groups have, because the teachers are more culturally confident when they're consulting with the steering groups. The steering group, some of our steering groups, they're advising their teachers on curriculum. And if we're talking about curriculum for us, that's what you want. You want the learners front and centre. So if the teachers are more culturally literate, what it looks like is the children can be really curious and authentically curious. So what it looks like for me when I speak to the steering groups and we're saying, Miss, we're doing this because it's our idea. They're not talking about curriculum for Wales. They think they are leading their schools to become actively anti-racist. And what I love is the fact that the children are really, really articulate, talking about the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. That's what it looks like. Not just the head teacher telling me this is what we're doing. When you talk to the steering group, and especially the allies, who are just, I would say, as articulate and culturally literate as their counterparts in the global majority. And when you're having children from primary school to top secondary school saying this is what we're doing in our school, that's what I think it looks like when children's voices are there. And then what I was lucky enough to do, when one of the schools, they'd spent a week wanting the teachers to showcase what they were doing. And then they invited parents in, and in the secondary setting, having parents to be active participants in an anti-racist journey, that's what I felt it looked like, having parents saying, this is what we're doing with our secondary school. So for me, it's looking at the children and saying, this is our school, our curriculum, this is our community, and this is who we represent. So what it looks like is children standing up and being counted.
That sounds really, really interesting. And you said it's in the third year now, so I guess it's growing.
Yes.
Is word spreading between schools across the Vale?
It is growing, but then what we have to do is keep our schools psychologically safe. Because when you start doing the action research, you are hypervigilant to institutional racism in every which way, because us as professionals, we are educated in a Eurocentric way. And then even if we went to school in a different country, we had teacher training in this way. So having to really challenge all of the preconceptions we have as adults, whether it's support staff, teachers, thinking, what do we need to do differently? Because in order to do a broad, balanced curriculum, the teachers have got to do the homework, and that's where the anti-racism professional learning gives the teachers time. Because if they're trying to think about resources in true Cynefin style, they've got to do some homework. But that's hard if they've not been taught about inclusion, what it looks like. So for me, the professional learning gives teachers the time to collaborate with each other and outside of the local authority to make their curriculum offer actively inclusive.
And are there any particular aspects of the professional learning that they do within that time that you feel have been the most valuable? You've definitely talked about that voice of the pupils coming through and the impact that's had. What else did the staff feedback was kind of the most impactful in terms of helping them go on that journey?
Reading. There are pre-reads that schools do before, and for me, it challenges them. So once they come with an open heart and an open mind, because they do feel quite vulnerable the first 2 sessions, because you come into teaching to make a difference. So when they start looking at where institutional racism sits, it makes them feel quite vulnerable. So for me, it can be hard, and we have to keep our staff safe while doing that. So yes, we give them pre-reads. Yes, we give them academic papers. But the main thing is we do it in a coaching style. So it's not something we do to schools, we do it with schools. So that for me has made it more successful, but it is hard and it is labour intensive. But for me, it's the most impactful.
And I think hearing you talk about it and having heard a couple of the leaders who've been involved talk about it, I've definitely got that sense of the way you've approached it has definitely led to them and that engagement on their part, that feeling of wanting to make the change, that real sort of drive to make a difference then as a result. So, I think long may it continue. And I think that probably segues us nicely into maybe to come into an experience of a school that has been part of that project. But I know, Sian, in Kitchener, you've been on your own journey as a school, haven't you, in terms of how do you create in a very diverse community where you are, how do you create an inclusive curriculum and an inclusive culture and ethos in the school? So do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey so far?
Yes, our journey sounds quite similar to the sort of journey that Martine was describing that her schools have been on. Inclusion is really important to us as a school. We do serve a richly diverse community. We have over 90% of our children are from global majority backgrounds. But within that, there are many, many different ethnic, cultural, heritage, languages represented. It's very easy to presume that just because we are a school with a lot of diversity, that we are therefore by default inclusive. And when we began on that anti-racist journey with that professional learning that we started with, it made us really question, how inclusive are we? How much does our curriculum, do our policies, what we're doing, how does that reflect and represent all of the diversity and all of the pupils and families that make up our school community? So we really had to look at, are we valuing, and how do we know? Do we know our school community well? So we had to have a lot of professional learning around that, and we embarked on that journey with the support of DARPL initially. We decided that we really needed to look at our curriculum offer and really look at what we were doing. And we needed to do that not through the lens of our predominantly white senior leadership team and teaching staff. We realised that we actually need to bring everybody's voices to the table and look at this through a different lens. And we set off, we realised actually quite early on in our journey that we needed to understand better, but that our children also didn't have a strong sense of their own identity, and they didn't really feel a connection to Wales. They didn't see themselves necessarily as Welsh, even though many of them had been born in Wales and their parents might have been born in Wales. So we decided that we would do a whole school learning project looking at identity and belonging to try and get to know our children better, but also to help to develop that sense of identity and connecting that was missing. It would be easy to not do that well if you're only looking at it through your lens. So we realised that we needed to involve our family and involve our community. So we set up a range of parental workshops and really worked hard bringing our families in and using their experiences and really listening to our whole community. And we also set up a steering group. So it was our inclusion, a diversity and equity steering group, which was made up of the children. I would like to say that professional learning was really important in this, but having senior leadership professional learning. So myself and the other assistant head teacher, we were lucky that we were able to join the DARPL senior leadership training because we needed to create capacity. We needed to completely rethink our curriculum. For us, it wasn't just about making sure our children were reflected in resources and books, although that was a big part of it. We needed to move away from it being about Black History Month or a one-off thing to being properly embedded in every aspect of our curriculum. That our curriculum, this is who we are, this is what we're about. It needs to be inclusive on every level. And we really wanted to make sure that our curriculum reflected our children properly so that it was something that was authentic, it was relevant to them, that they could relate to what we were doing and that they could see themselves in that to try and create a sense of value.
That's really interesting. And you talked there about the importance of professional learning. And I just wonder whether there was any reluctance or any challenges that you had to overcome. And if so, what were the things that really helped to kind of get your whole staff on board and take it forward? Because that's where we found you'd got to when we inspected, I know, but, you know, thinking about that journey that other schools might be going on, what helped to bring everybody with you?
It certainly is challenging. It is, because you have to, as a whole staff, you have to get used to feeling uncomfortable. You have to talk about things and you have to be willing to listen to things that might not feel comfortable to you. And relating back to an earlier point, over half of our staff are from global majority backgrounds, but many of those staff members, well, most of them are teaching assistants at the lower end of the pay scale. And we thought we needed to bring everybody together because we had this resource, but we needed to come together as a whole community so we could move forward together. We did a lot of professional learning around really creating the culture and climate for that. That was really important. We had to talk about feeling uncomfortable. We had to get to a place where people were actually willing to share and open up about their lived experiences. We looked at really careful groupings. We reached out as a cluster. We went to other schools who were on a similar journey, so that it wasn't just completely insular for our staff, so that they could see that other people were doing this. We had DARPL in to help us with that. But it was really important that we continued that, and we created our own capacity for that professional learning. So we looked at very carefully how we grouped people. We had sessions of professional learning that were dedicated to just talking and using talk in order to have a better understanding of racism. And I think Martine made the important point that you can't teach anti-racism if you don't understand it yourself. But it absolutely, there were challenges. At the same time that we were starting our anti-racist work, we also had the RSC part of the curriculum was rolling out, and that had caused some controversies within our community. So at some points, we did have some feedback, well, what about other areas of the Equalities Act? What about other protected characteristics? So we really had to do a lot of work on that with our staff, and trying to help everyone see, well, actually, this is important and this supports all of those other areas. We also ran actual parent workshops. So we educated our parents. We did professional learning in many respects for them at the same time. And we were able to say, this is what we stand for. This is why it's important. And get their voice, so that when we were forming policies and practices and curriculum, everybody's input was in that. So that was really important for us in helping move that forward. And I think the curriculum, as we started to change our curriculum, our teachers could see the impact it was having on the children. And when they started to see that, and the impact it was having on our parents, and as they started to see that, they started to really understand that they could see how important it was. And so we grew that together, at that point. But it's still a work in progress. It's still something we have to come back to.
How would you describe the impact on pupils? I mean, what kind of things have they demonstrated? Have they changed their attitudes to learning, attitudes to society in general? And also perhaps how would you know that? Would you, evaluate that somehow, or would you have a conversation with them or gather some evidence around that just to assure yourself that things are working?
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamental that anti-racist, it's through our school improvement plan. We look at it in self-evaluation. We consult with our children through the inclusion, diversity and equity group. So we're doing that all the time with our children, and through those, so it's a continuous cycle. It's not something that you can have a checklist and just tick off. It's something that you have to say, this is what we believe in, and this is something that we're always going to do. Our children are so much more confident in the way that they speak about themselves. They are able to articulate their thoughts and feelings so much better. They are more confident. Initially, we did see more racist incidents because I think the children themselves, they were more aware. They knew what racism was. And that is important because they need to be equipped to deal with that, especially, as they move on to secondary school, and they are more likely to come across those things. But we needed to equip them with that. And they were more confident in bringing issues to us. They were helping us. They will say to us, well, hang on a minute, we've not got, this bilingual book in our school. Well, what about this person? We talked about really, as we move through the school and our older children, they would bring things to us. They would say, well, what about the Rwanda bill? What about asylum seekers? How does this relate to me? And we built that through the curriculum. So it's very tangible in the way that they now talk. But I think the biggest thing is actually they do feel more valued, and they can talk about how they feel more valued. And they're much more articulate in that. It's really building their self-esteem, which is what we want to do.
That's really interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned about that initial increase in reporting of racist incidents. And I think people worry about that sometimes. Obviously, we'd rather there weren't any racist incidents, wouldn't we? But actually, that resilience and that actual confidence to call it when it does happen, so you can actually act upon it, is really important. And I think, one of the things that we've found in our work over the years is that there's definitely underreporting, I think, and that's not helpful for anybody. So it's really great that actually that confidence to know it, name it, report it, and then everyone can act on it is really good. In terms of the curriculum, you talked quite a lot about some of the changes there that you've been making. And I know that one of the areas of Professor Charlotte's report was around improving the resources that are there for the curriculum. I know when we talked, you mentioned it wasn't just the sort of tangible resources, it was actually the people, the role models that you can draw on to enrich your curriculum. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of the work you've done in that area so others could maybe think about it.
Yeah, that's been really important for our children to have role models from Wales, from their local community, people that they can relate to, who are Welsh themselves, from global majority backgrounds, who are doing great things and different jobs and different sectors. We realised that a lot of the current kind of resourcing around that might be used for anti-racism might be people who aren't actually that relatable to our children. So we might go to Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks, but we realised that actually to make this really meaningful for our children, we needed to draw in experiences and work with people who were from global majority backgrounds and were Welsh. We wanted them to get a sense of what modern Wales looked like, that was a Wales that could belong to them and that they were part of, because they had this disconnect. We wanted to create a sense of conniving around that. We had to completely rethink our Eisteddfod. We had to make that more meaningful and more relevant to them, and really did quite a lot of work around that. And we made sure that our IDE team, pupil voice group, really evaluated that afterwards to see and go round. Was that more meaningful to you? Drawing in people, we work with the Earth Centre. We've drawn in people from who have gone through Welsh school settings as well. So we've really tried to make those experiences extremely authentic, extremely relevant, and something that they can see themselves reflected. And that's been really successful. And the motivation for learning that came from those experiences, when we've got authors and we've got directors and we've got rugby players, all Welsh, all looking like them, people from similar backgrounds, the motivation for the children just skyrocketed. They were so much more engaged in their learning, and they were so excited to see themselves properly represented.
I love that. Engaged, excited, seeing themselves.
Yeah, it made a huge difference. It really did. Yeah. It's just much more relatable for them than somebody from America from 70 years ago. And you can still touch on that, but drawing parallels from that to people now was more powerful.
I mean, there's a new body being created, ADNOV, and I know their task is about supporting the curriculum for Wales with materials and resources. In terms of this particular area, is there anything, if you were going to ask, they're very new, they're looking for their direction, but if you were going to ask them for what they should be developing, what kind of things would they focus on?
I think look at who is doing what in Wales, and look at our own population, because it is difficult. It's, there isn't a really visible presence of modern global majority Welsh people within our kind of media or within our, that was hard to find, and hats off to our teachers, because they did a really good job of really persisting with that. And we were lucky that we did have some people who were able to signpost, and we drew on our local community. But I think that was maybe easier it wasn't easy, but maybe easier for us because of where we are geographically. But I think if you're a school and you don't have that community to draw on, how are they going to know where those Welsh role models are? How are they going to find that? And at the moment, that's not there yet. So I don't know how exactly you would do that, but I think we need to highlight we need to highlight global majority people in Wales right now who are doing great things.
Sounds like a challenge for Adnodd.
Yes.
So we've heard lots of really interesting aspects of work that's developing there. Perhaps maybe thinking about what advice might we give to other providers, not just schools, providers across the education and training system. Thinking about your experiences, maybe if I come back to you, Martine, to start, what kind of nuggets, what do you think you'd want to give as advice to somebody else embarking on this journey?
I was trying to think of one piece of advice, but I couldn't. So you've got two.
That's fine.
The first one that I would, language is vital, adjectives are vital. So what we did, we asked young people what adjectives they want. Do they want to be called ethnic minority? Do they want to be called black? And the term that they kept coming back to was global majority. They liked it. It empowered them. So one bit of advice, ask people from the global majority what adjective they want. And don't be afraid if you get it wrong. Just ask. So just ask. Second bit of advice is be an ally. Because there are sections of Wales that aren't very diverse. So we want those areas to have active allies that are wanting to find and celebrate local champions. Because for me, that's what Cynefin should look like. It should look for belonging for everybody, not just certain sectors of Welsh society. So be an active ally.
That's really good. And I think both of you, but certainly Sian, you mentioned DARPL, so Diversity and Anti-Racist Professional Learning. So that's an organisation set up on behalf of Welsh Government to deliver a range of professional learning in this area. And if there are schools listening at the moment who haven't accessed any of that training or their resources, and I'd definitely say go and have a look there as a starting point. And particularly they have a strong focus on how to develop yourself as an active ally, I think, don't they, through some of their courses. So definitely go and have a look. Maybe coming to you then, Sian, in terms of what bits of advice might you have for others?
I would definitely say professional learning needs to be the starting point, and it's not really something you can necessarily do on your own. So I think reaching out to organisations like DARPL or the Vale with Martine, I think is really important. You need to make sure you're kind of heading in the right direction. And so support with that, it's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. It's probably, and to do well particularly. So do reach out, but you have to dedicate a lot of time over to professional learning, because my other piece of advice would be is that you can't just look at one area. It's not as simple as just looking at the curriculum or just adapting your policies. It has to come through everything. So that's really important as well, that it's not just a one-off. It's not something you can just tick off. It's about developing and refining and evaluating on that continuous cycle. So yeah, those would be my two. Professional learning, definitely. Yeah.
Professional learning and that time to do that well, to do it properly, it sounds like. Tony, what about you? You obviously saw lots of evidence as part of the annual report work we did, but, hearing others and from your inspection experience this year so far, what's the kind of advice you might give to other people?
I think for all schools and all providers to, try their hand at this work and don't shy away from it. Because I'm guessing that there could be a temptation out there that, we don't have that many pupils from ethnic minorities, the global majority, and therefore that it's not for us, it's not a problem that we have. But I think, considering what, particularly Sian, what you said about the impact on pupils and how they become global citizens from being part of that work is very encouraging. And it's a really important development of any child as they progress through their sort of school career as well. So I think it's about trying different things and perhaps not to worry if things don't work first time around, or if you've tried a particular idea and it doesn't work, well, fine. If you don't try at all, then you'll get probably nowhere. So I do think it's important for all schools, no matter what their area and the pupils that are coming in from different areas and so on. I think it's just about trying it, using some of those new curriculum things that are available, trying different resources, and after a certain amount of time, you're sure to find things that are working, things that are encouraging, and then develop from there, I think. But it does take also, I think, strong leadership to ensure that this has a proper focus as well, and that it's developed a bit more strategically than just a random try and piloting of different things. I think it does benefit from people sitting down, thinking carefully about how they want to design this as well. But of course, there's nothing wrong with experimenting with all the different resources that are currently out there as well.
Yeah, thank you all. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I think, that it's chimed what you've both been saying. There's definitely some common themes coming out, I think, in terms of that, the importance of professional learning and committing the time and the space, the safe space. So I like the way that you described that, Martine, to allow staff to explore this area. But then it's not just about staff. What we've heard, I think, is that really active engagement of pupils and them being shared partners in this learning journey, and then also reaching out to the parents, the communities that a school or another provider is serving, and making sure that they're engaged and that they're on a kind of education journey as well. And it's only, I guess, where they all come together, I think then it really starts to have impact. So lots of really encouraging ideas and some really tangible ways that you were describing that impact for learners of that work that's been happening. This podcast will be coming out when people are listening to it at the same time as our annual report. So I'd urge people to go and have a read of the annual report, have a read of the cross-cutting theme on this particular topic, but obviously there'll be lots of other really valuable information in that report as well. As Tony said, there's some kind of reflective questions for practitioners. There's some other useful little resources about other aspects of our work as well. So can I just really thank you all? It's been a really great discussion, and thank you for coming and giving up your time to share some of your ideas. And I really hope that people listening find it helpful and help them to have the confidence to take those steps on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely.
Yeah.